Hello YouTube, it's Ryan here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we're going to be doing another book review. Today we're going to be looking at Tarzan of the Apes, book 1, literally Tarzan of the Apes, part of the Adventures of Lord Greystoke, but I don't think anyone calls it that. It's just the Tarzan series. This is written by Edgar Burroughs, one of the goats of sci-fi literature, in my opinion, although he is from 1912, so he has some pretty not good opinions by today's standards, right? Just how it is. He was also from the South, I'm pretty sure, so lots of that stuff can show up in his books. I don't really think it really does all that much, but I know that some people can say that he is a problematic author here and there, but usually I feel like most people don't really know too much about him, even though Tarzan and Barsoom, John Carter of Mars, are some very important, very seminal texts for a lot of the modern stuff that we see today. So yeah, the publisher here is Del Rey. This is in their science fiction line, as you guys can see right there, although there really isn't anything science fiction in this book specifically, but I do think the Tarzan series does generally fall under science fiction in later volumes. It really depends on how you want to look at it. This is primarily just an adventure novel, and in terms of a demographic, I'm not really sure. I would say it's an adult title, but most people that probably read this when it came out were teenagers and young adults, and obviously proper adults as well. But I think that this is basically all ages, and I think it's a pretty interesting kind of series. I think later volumes in the series might be mostly adults, but I think this one is accessible to basically anyone that is interested in a cool guy that lives with gorillas. So yeah, and like I said, the genre is adventure. There really isn't any subgenres at all. Romance is important in this book, but it is not a secondary genre like in the John Carter of Mars series. So I would just say this is purely adventure. And in terms of adaptations, well, there's like TV shows, movies, there's the Disney movie, there's the Disney show. There's probably going to be a Disney live action version here soon as well. At least I would assume that they would make one, because out of all of the stuff that they've made live action, this one seems like the most on brand. And they already have a lot of models from when they did Lion King, so it would be pretty cheap for them to do it, I think, because they don't have to do the extra work to create everything from scratch again. And then there's been a lot of things. There also probably is going to be some new adaptations coming here down the pipeline in the coming years, because I'm pretty sure that the rights for Tarzan movies just went to Sony recently, and it would be really nice if they could start a franchise of either a TV show or a movie that is faithful to the books, well made, probably updated a bit so that it fits more with modern sensibilities. But there's just so much potential to Tarzan, and I think that it would be really good for them to really tap into it and have like a proper good show. So yeah, the premise here is basically that there's this young child that somehow ends up in the jungle, and he is raised by these apes of unknown origin or species. It's very difficult to really tell what they are. I picture them as gorillas in my head, but most of the time they're pictured as chimpanzees. They're actually something in between, and they do have smarter than average intelligence, right? So if humans are 100% intelligent and chimpanzees are like 50% intelligent, these apes would be like 75% intelligent, in a very basic scale. Like, they're not human levels of intelligent, but they're a lot more intelligent than you would think an animal would be, right? Depending on your views on intelligence in animals, right? And he grows up a wild ape, basically. And when he becomes an adult, he kind of realizes that, hey, I'm not an ape. And he kind of tries to teach himself how to be more human, and eventually joins civilization by the end of the novel. And it's a pretty interesting story. So yeah, the plot line is pretty simple, straight up. It's the life of a young man from age 0 to basically birth to around 20-ish years old. I would say about 25-ish, depending on how you want to count certain events in the book. in terms of time, right? So yeah, it starts off with Lord Greystoke and Alice, his wife, who are a English noble family, and have been sent to Africa to deal with some issues that the royalty of the time wants them to look into. They know that it's going to be a few years, and so they prepare all of the stuff that they need for their young child that is not born yet, and so they take it all with them. They end up on this pretty sketchy, pretty sus ship, and eventually they actually end up with a mutiny on their hands while they're on the ship, and are forced off the boat and marooned on this unknown shore in Africa. I think it's technically set somewhere in the Congo, but I'm not sure if they use Congo the same way that we use it today. So I'm not sure. But it is some unknown stretch of land in Africa that is actually pretty closed off from the rest of Africa, and it is a very like self-contained setting. But it is a deep jungle kind of situation. And they die after some gorillas or apes come by, and they end up having a fight with Lord Greystoke, who is taking care of his child since his wife died a few months prior. And Kala, the ape, actually adopts Tarzan because she has recently lost her child, who I think is Nita. So the little punk rocker gorilla from the Tarzan movie, like the Disney Tarzan movie, is actually dead in the book, I think, because I'm pretty sure that is Nita. And so Tarzan grows up with these apes. We get to see like a very fast forward pace of his childhood from birth to 10 years old, and we get to notice that he knows that he's not an ape, and his ape family also knows that he's not an ape, but they don't really have like a good way to explain to him what he is, and so they just give him the name Tarzan, which in their language means white skin. So this guy is literally just called the white man. And it's pretty funny, actually, if you think about it. And so we get to age 10, and then at 13 he battles this gorilla called Bolgani, who is from a rival tribe, and then eventually he wins, and he basically ends up with a very horrible set of injuries, and so he has to rest for a long time. And eventually he actually manages to locate his parents' cabin and figure out how to open their self-locking door, or their I think it's like some sort of self-locking door. And from there, he actually manages to teach himself how to read and write. He cannot speak because he has no one to speak with or anyone to hear this language from, but he manages to figure out how to read. Now, while I was reading this, I found it to be pretty difficult to believe that, because I'm not really sure how it's possible to read and write without hearing the language. Like, in my mind, you associate the sound to the letter after you know the sound. But then I realized that, modern people that are deaf can learn how to read and write, and they don't have that either. So I think it works, especially because he learned from looking at kids' books that have an image, and then that image associates to the letter, and so he can kind of figure out what everything kind of works like. Although I'm still iffy on how that really works, but it is possible. I think that it is possible now. When I was reading it, I didn't find it to be all that possible, but it was the least like impossible thing. It was just one that I really focused on, right? And he starts growing, and I think at 17 he battles Tublat, who is his foster dad. He is Kala's mate. And then he battles Kerchak, and becomes king of the ape tribe, which actually grew very large under Kerchak's rule, because Kerchak was a very violent ruler, but he was also very powerful and very able. So he was kind of a tyrant, but also kind of good in some ways. And it's pretty interesting. I actually like that. And eventually he actually ends up encountering other humans for the first time. They're native African people, so they're black, where he's white skinned. And so he knows that they're humans, but he knows that they're also not his own people. And he becomes pretty, angry and negative towards them very early on. Now, a lot of people would probably say that this is for racist reasons, because Edgar Rice Burroughs was from the 1912s, from the 1900s, I don't remember when he was born, but his first book wasn't published in 1912. So it is probably that he meant this because he was being racist. But within the context of the story, it actually makes complete sense that, you know, he would be angry at the people that took his mother from him, because one of these African natives actually kills Kala. And so Tarzan goes and kills him in revenge. And then he realizes that they have tools that he would like to have as well, but he can't communicate with them. So he basically just becomes this this trickster god for them. And he does things and takes from them and stuff like that. And so he develops a very antagonistic relationship with these native Africans. And eventually, white people show up on this shore because of a very similar situation to what happened with Tarzan and his own family. So there's this woman called Jane Porter, her father Archimedes Porter, who is a professor or an intelligent, learned man of some kind, and his assistant and friend, I can't remember his name, and Clayton, who actually happens to be Tarzan's cousin, because Tarzan's real name is John Clayton, and Cecil Clayton is his cousin, and he is the new owner or heir to the Greystoke family name and fortune. Although the book doesn't really care about this until the very end of the book, and so it is kind of interesting, but it is meaningful that Clayton actually is his cousin and not just some evil hunter like in the Disney Tarzan movie, right? And so he realizes that these are the people that he is related to, as in they are part of his tribe. They're also white people. And so he helps them because he realizes that they're not actually able of navigating the jungle, because they're people from America and England. They don't really have jungles and are not people that are aware of how to traverse them. So he actually ends up becoming kind of their protector while they're here. And eventually a lot of different things happen. Jane actually gets uptaken by Terkos, who is, what would it be, like Tarzan's stepbrother, because he is the son of Tublat, but he is not Kala's child, so he would be kind of like some sort of stepbrother to Tarzan. And Terkos actually hates Tarzan because I'm pretty sure Terkos just could never beat Tarzan, and he wanted to be leader of the tribe. And eventually Tarzan lets him be the leader because Tarzan doesn't want to be tied down to being the leader of this tribe of apes, especially not once Jane shows up. And eventually Terkos wants to take Jane from Tarzan because he knows Tarzan likes Jane. And at this point Terkos has been driven away from the ape tribe because he's a very tyrannical ruler, but not like Kerchak was, because Kerchak was actually meaningful and useful even if he was tyrannical. This guy is just bad, right? So they remove him from the tribe, and Terkos actually tries to take Jane, and eventually he and Tarzan battle. Tarzan protects Jane. He takes her to this place called this natural amphitheater kind of thing, this like place where the gorillas had this or the apes had this ceremony called Dum Dum. And so he takes her there. He builds her a little place where she can sleep, and they interact with each other, and they basically speak in signs, because even though Tarzan can write and read, he doesn't have the tools necessary at the moment, and so he has to just kind of make himself understood some way, right? And so Jane actually ends up falling in love with Tarzan at this moment, but she kind of falls in love with the idea of this wild man protector, and not necessarily with Tarzan himself. eventually she is returned to the other people, and at this point they find out that Clayton, her dad, and these French military men that recently also showed up at the shore went to search for her and are actually in conflict with the native African tribe of that at that time. And so they go there, and eventually Tarzan goes to help them, and he manages to save this guy called the Arnaut, or Darnall, probably in French. I'm not really sure, but he saves this guy, and he heals him, and he helps him get better. And while they're doing that over at the Dum Dum place, everyone else has left. And so they eventually make it back to the shoreline, to where the Greystoke cabin is, and they realize that everyone is gone. And so the Arnaut teaches Tarzan how to speak French, and then teaches them how to speak English afterwards as they travel to the nearest settlement. And eventually, Tarzan civilizes himself as he and Darnell are doing things together. And eventually Tarzan makes it to the Americas to go find Jane. And it's actually really interesting how everything works. And the really meaningful kind of thing here is that Tarzan basically civilizes himself so that he can be with Jane. And when he gets to Jane, he realizes that she loves him, but she also needs to fulfill duties of her status. And so it actually is better that she marries his cousin Clayton, Cecil Clayton, instead of letting her know, hey, I'm actually the heir. He kind of just tells her he's a nobody. And so he goes away. And it's an interesting kind of concept that the meaningful, positive, end to the story doesn't happen because he chooses what is he chooses to sacrifice his own feelings for the betterment of her life status, or I guess, I don't know. I think it's really, really good. Overall, the story was really amazing. I really only touched on the main points. There's a lot more stuff to be found in this novel, and I really recommend it. It's really, really good. There are a few things that are really not that important, but that did make me fall out of the experience while I was reading. So the first one is, how did he learn how to read? I did already talk about this. I didn't really understand how it was possible to learn how to read and write without having the associated sounds. It wasn't until yesterday that I realized that, deaf people can also read and write, and they don't need to have sounds associated with those letters to understand what it means, right? So that kind of doesn't really matter anymore. It's a moot point. I understand how it's possible, even if I don't really know how to do it. It still feels really weird for me. It seems really hard, but it does seem possible, and so that's a thing that doesn't matter anymore. The other two things that kind of were interesting is that he actually knew how to spell ape language in English letters. I don't know how he is able to do that because he doesn't know what these letters actually sound like. So how did he manage to Romanize these sounds that he knows from the native tribes people? It's a very minimal complaint, but it did bother me because he clearly calls himself Tarzan, as in what the apes call him, right? And he writes it Tarzan. How would he know how to write that in English from that language without hearing what the English letters sound like? It's a really minimal point, but it is a point that bothered me for a while. There doesn't seem to be a good answer for this, except that it's a contrivance so that the story can move forward. Because if we're being realistic here, he would probably write white skin because that's the meaning of his name, right? Because he doesn't know what these letters match to what sounds, right? So it is interesting, but I don't know. It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, it's very unimportant to the story. It's just something that bothered me while I was reading. And the other thing is that he is described very many times as a very handsome man, but he is severely scarred all over the place. When he fought Bogoni, he had part of his neck skin ripped off, And so he has like a giant scar here and a bunch of scars all over his face and chest. And he has this scar that like scalped him basically. So he has a giant scar across his face. And then he's still described as a immensely attractive man. But in this kind of like very, what's it called? High society group of people that he knows, he would probably be pretty ugly with all of these scars all over his body. So I'm not really sure how that works. You know, again, it doesn't really matter. He is still an attractive man, and his father is actually very, very well described at the beginning of the story. So you know what he's supposed to look like. But the whole time I was like thinking like, bro, this guy is scarred as hell. How does anyone find him hot or attractive or handsome or well built, right? Like, scars are attractive in some cases, but like this guy has like scars all over his face and all over his chest that are gigantic. Like he's battling animals that are like twice as big as him all the time and getting hurt very severely, and he doesn't have like proper medical care. Like he should be really ugly looking, right? Like you guys know that the evil character from the Clash of the Titans movie franchise, like the guy that was angry at Zeus and he has like scars all over his body. Like I feel like that's what Tarzan would look like if his scars were like realistic. And so no one could really find him attractive, even though he is like built like a Greek god, right? So it's kind of crazy. But it is not really important. It's just something funny I thought about. And then in terms of characters here, we really just have Tarzan. Tarzan is the most important character. The only real character. Everyone else is just kind of like they are still fleshed out enough to be characters, but they are primarily just pieces on the board to move so that Tarzan can have situations occur to him, right? Like he's a very complex and very cool character. I actually like him a lot. He's a very thoughtful and well experimented person, and for the vast majority of the book, he's actually just an ape. It isn't until he learns how to read and write, and actually until he meets the Arnaut, that he becomes a man. So the vast majority of the time, you're basically rooting for like a very anthropomorphized monkey, and it's really interesting. It's really cool. I really like how that works. And there's very many situations where he has to be more thoughtful, more intelligent than everyone around him, because he has to make up for these very severe drawbacks that he is a human, right? Like, yes, he's muscular as hell and he's super powerful for a human. He is essentially a superhero, but he is still weaker than every ape that he's against, that every lion or cheetah or leopard that he fights. And so it's very interesting and very meaningful that he uses very simple technology to overcome these issues. And it's really, really cool. It is really a testament of like the power of our brains. And it's really, really cool. I like it a lot. In terms of animal characters, there's Kerchak, Kala. I think those are the two most important ape characters, and I quite like them a lot. There's also Sabor and Numa and Shita, who are all different big feline characters. I think Sabor is a lion. Numa is also a lion, I think. And Shita is a leopard of some sort. And then there's Tantor, who is an elephant, but he isn't really that important. He is only mentioned a few times, and mostly just to say, hey, Tarzan is the only person that became friends with Tantor in all of the forest. And it's really, really cool. I quite like that. I think it's fun. And in terms of human characters, we have Jane, who is a very beautiful, blonde, young woman. I think she's about 20, even though she's treated like she's 10 by everyone except Tarzan. She's 20 years old. She's a very beautiful, blonde, very, kind of short and pretty woman from, I think she's from Baltimore. I think that's in Wisconsin somewhere, I think. I'm not really sure. I don't know too much about cities that are not in Texas. Sorry, I'm from Texas. There's like 5 cities that are important here. I don't really have any space in my brain for any other city in the U.S. And it's pretty interesting. She's a really, I don't know, she's a pretty interesting character, but there really isn't too much for her yet. She's not really like Deja Torres. Yet she is very much still just a young woman that hasn't really fully realized herself, and I quite like that. But because she also does have moments later on at the end of the novel where she's very headstrong and very powerful as an individual, and I like that a lot. Then we have her dad, Professor Porter, or Dr. Porter, I don't really remember. I really like him a lot. I think his name is Archimedes, and he's a very funny character. He is, I don't know, him and the dynamic he has with his friend are very funny. I like them a lot. They're like the bickering duo, like R2-D2 and C3PO. They're kind of that type of characters. And they're very fun. I quite like them a lot. Then we have Clayton. I like him a lot as well. He's basically kind of a mirror image to Tarzan. He is what Tarzan would have been in a different life, and I find that interesting. But it doesn't really provide too much because Tarzan doesn't really care about that. And then we have Darnot, or Darnot, I guess. I like him as well. There really isn't too much to say about him, but he is cool. So yeah. In terms of world building, there really isn't too much. We're in this nebulous African place. I think, again, like I said, it is somewhere in the west areas of the Congo, but it is still very nebulous. Like, it doesn't really tell you, hey, in this part of Africa, this is where you'll find it. And there's these apes that are significantly smarter than you would think an ape is, even though apes, the great apes are all very, very intelligent. Specifically, chimpanzees are very intelligent. But they are, what's it called? They're a little bit more intelligent than you would assume. And I like that. I think it's interesting. But because, yes, they're intelligent, but Tarzan is still more intelligent than them just by virtue of being a human. Although, I don't know, maybe you could say that humans are only intelligent because we have the resources to teach ourselves a lot more often than, any other species might be able to. So I don't know. It really depends, but on how you want to look at nature versus nurture. But generally, I guess humans are naturally more intelligent than other animals. And this ends up being a very important plot point throughout this whole story. So I like that a lot. In terms of a rating, it's a 4 out of 5 because it did feel a little bit long for my taste. When I read Edgar Rice Burroughs, most of the stuff I read is pretty short, less than 200 pages probably. This one was about 300 pages long. And because it is in its most pure form, there are very many words here that I didn't really know because they're out of fashion. Like, instead of saying before, they would say E-R-E, right? Which I guess, I was eventually able to understand what it meant, but it's a word that was very difficult to really understand for the first half of the book because it doesn't come up very often. You would think that the word before, or its equivalent, would come up pretty often in writing, but Edgar Rice Burroughs doesn't actually use it that often, and so every time he did, I was like, oh crap, what is this? And other than that, it is old, and it is noticeably old. There's a lot of things here that people that are not able to be open-minded about their reading in terms of allowing authors to be shitty by today's standards would not be able to find engaging. And generally, I wasn't really offended by anything. I didn't really care. But there were some moments where I'm like, oh, this is pretty concerning, right? So it does show its age a lot more than John Carter of Mars does, even though they're from the same time period. And I think that's just because this is engaging with African people, whereas John Carter of Mars is just engaging with a made-up race of people, right? And so when you're putting this racial kind of ideology that isn't really all that prevalent, but it is still noticeable, and you're directly comparing, the white Tarzan to the black native Africans and gorillas, you kind of do see this issue that occurs, right? So it does kind of hold itself back in that sense, and I would really say that it is probably a good thing for Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, the people that own the rights to this, to really try to modernize it, to make a new edition that massages the content a little bit and make it known that, hey, this is not the original, we have changed it, but there is still an original version you can buy if you want that version, correctly. But it is still probably a good idea for them to massage it a little bit, just enough to make it less concerning, and put it a new edited version to at least change up some of the language so that it's a little bit more current. And other than that, there really isn't much to say. It's a 4 out of 5. It's one of the most enduring characters of American literature, and it is one that I think deserves to have shows and movies written about and filmed, because it is very, very good. It's a great character, and him being a character that is just a wild man actually allows for a lot of very interesting situations and a lot of man versus nature kind of things that I would find to be really, really fun to read and watch. So yeah, I hope that Tarzan and Barzoom and everything that Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote is picked up by all of the people that want to cash in on 80s nostalgia and like IP recognition type things, because Edgar Rice Burroughs' stuff is a huge set of IPs and also a huge set of very good stories, especially now with all of the advancements in CGI and animation. It would be very, very good to go back and make these stories as well as possible. Like I would really like to see a Game of Thrones kind of like budget for a John Carter of Mars TV show. I think it'd be really, really amazing. I think Tarzan would also be really good with that kind of budget and kind of ideas. And I would really like to see that happen, but it's not likely for a while, at least. We'll see what Sony does with the license that they recently got. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you thought. And thank you guys very much for watching. See you guys later.